Jim, there was a very, very rare White House briefing today. Right. Update our viewers on the very latest.
That's right, Wolf. And President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as you said, they have managed to get the State of the Union address back on the calendar. The Speaker just re-invited the President back to the Capitol 1 week from tomorrow. And just a few moments ago, the President, he did accept. So the White House, as you said, just wrapped up its first briefing in more than a month. That was earlier this afternoon as top administration officials announced new sanctions on Venezuela. Those sanctions aimed at prodding that country's embattled leader, Nicolas Maduro, to step aside. But the White House still has its hands full on the domestic front as aides are scrambling to prevent yet another government shutdown.
We have to have a wall.
It's as if President Trump has been hiding in a cave. He's largely been out of sight ever since he backed down in his standoff with Democrats over his quest for a border wall. And with just 18 days and counting before yet another government shutdown, the president doesn't sound optimistic, telling the Wall Street Journal the odds of reaching a deal to prevent another lapse in funding are less than 50-50, which is why top White House officials are warning the president is prepared to declare a national emergency so he can try to go around Congress.
What I do know is if they don't come back with a deal, that means Democrats get virtually nothing. That will make the president and force him to have to take executive action.
It's still better, John, to get it through legislation. That's the right way to do it. But at the end of the day, the president is going to secure the border one way or another.
Despite days of complaints from conservative allies that Mr. Trump was taken to the woodshed by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi,
she has just whipped the President of the United States.
The White House is trying to insist the president somehow won the stalemate.
Because the negotiations are still ongoing, and I would argue that conservatives that actually have influence have supported the president throughout this process. This is a simple fix. It's easy for Democrats to sit down and come to an agreement and work with us to get border security.
Democrats are already sounding worried about the prospects of reaching an agreement with the president.
I think the 35-day-long federal shutdown was completely senseless. I think for the president to take us back into another shutdown would be senseless. But the point of compromise is to not begin by saying absolutely no at this end or this end. It was the president who caused this shutdown by demanding $5.7 billion for a wall.
The shutdown appears to have done some political damage to the president, with the latest CNN poll of polls showing less than 40% of Americans approve of Mr. Trump's job performance. The Russia investigation likely isn't helping, with his longtime advisor Roger Stone sending mixed messages about whether he might cut a deal with special counsel Robert Mueller after the Nixon-era dirty trickster was indicted last week. Stone telling ABC News Sunday,
I would certainly testify honestly. I'd also testify honestly about any other matter, including any communications with the president.
And then today, just 24 hours later.
Are you willing to cut a deal with Mueller to avoid getting the case going to trial?
I don't answer hypothetical questions. I have no intention of doing so, however.
As he has with other targets of the Russia probe, the president is downplaying his relationship with his close friend, tweeting over the weekend that Stone didn't even work for me anywhere near the election. Another friend of the president's, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, is out with a new book, claiming that Mr. Trump thought he had put an end to the Russia investigation when he fired former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, an assessment shared by son-in-law Jared Kushner.
I said, listen, Flynn's the only guy who spoke to the Russians, apparently, and he said, so, I think this is going to end it, and I just laughed. And I said, Mr. President, it's unfortunate that I have to tell you this, but having done this myself for a living, we're going to be talking about this on Valentine's Day, February 18. They laughed out loud, and Jared told me I was crazy.
The White House was asked whether the Trump presidency was somehow endangered by the growing number of aides and associates ensnared in the Russia investigation.
Roger Stone last week, Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, Michael Flynn. Are you concerned, is the president concerned, that as more and more of his associates, former aides, are brought into this investigation, are indicted, plead guilty in this investigation, that this presidency is in danger?
Not at all. In fact, I think nothing could be further from the truth. The more that this goes on, the more and more we see that none of these things have anything to do with the president.
Now, we should also point out Press Secretary Sarah Sanders didn't really knock down the idea of a presidential pardon for Roger Stone, meaning that remains a live option for Mr. Trump. And, Wolf, we want to draw your attention to one other thing that happened at that White House briefing earlier this afternoon. John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, was caught on camera. A photographer took a picture of this, of his notepad. He was holding this notepad in the briefing room. And if you notice in that second line, it says 5,000 troops to Colombia. Well, in just the last several minutes, our White House producer, Kevin Liptak, was able to get a statement from a White House official over here. That very brief statement in response to this question about what that was all about essentially said, as the president has said, all options are on the table when it comes to the situation in Venezuela. So a very interesting development that really sort of went over all of our heads this afternoon at the White House briefing. We obviously couldn't see that from the front row of the briefing room, what was scrawled on the National Security Advisor's notebook, but that very almost cryptic line there. It says 5,000 troops to Colombia. The White House not knocking that down as potentially being an option for the United States in dealing with this crisis that's unfolding in Venezuela.
Yeah, and then he said all options are on the table, presumably the military option as well.
Right.
Very significant indeed. All right, good work, Jim.